The snow had started softly, like it always did in early winter, but by evening it turned into something far more dangerous. He could feel it in the way the wind pushed against his car, and in the uneasy sound of ice hitting the windshield. He was a black single father, tired from a long week away from home, wanting nothing more than to return to his little daughter who always waited for him at the door. He checked his phone. No signal. The weather app had stopped updating. The road ahead looked white and empty. Usually he was calm under pressure, but this storm felt different. It felt personal, almost like the world had decided to trap him in the middle of nowhere. A sudden gust of wind pushed his car sideways. He held the steering wheel tight, but the tires slid over the icy road. His heart jumped as the car swerved, then slowly rolled to a stop near a line of trees. The engine still hummed, but the road had disappeared under an ocean of snow. He knew he couldn't stay in the car. The temperature was dropping fast, and the nearest town was miles away. When he stepped outside, the cold slapped his face hard. Snow stung his skin. He scanned the area and noticed a faint glow light coming from a small wooden cabin hidden behind the pines. He hesitated. What if someone lived there? What if they didn't want a stranger knocking? But the storm didn't leave room for choices. He pulled his jacket tighter and pushed through the snow until he reached the cabin. The door wasn't locked. He opened it slowly. Inside, warmth touched his body instantly. A small fire burned in the fireplace. And then he saw her. A woman sat on a wooden chair with her coat wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up sharply when he entered. Her face was familiar not because he knew her personally, but because she was the kind of person people talked about on the news. A CEO, a woman known for confidence, wealth, and a personality that scared entire rooms into silence. Yet right now she didn't look powerful. She looked cold, tired, and stuck. Their eyes met, both startled to see the other. I'm sorry, he said first, brushing snow off his sleeves. My car slid off the road. I didn't know someone was here. Her expression softened slightly. It's fine. The storm caught me too. My car broke down a mile back. He nodded slowly. So they were both trapped. He closed the door behind him to keep the heat inside. The cabin was small, almost too small for two strangers, but warm enough to keep them alive through the storm. I can leave if you want, he offered. Though he already knew stepping back into the storm was not a real option, she shook her head. No, staying outside is dangerous. Just sit near the fire. Warm up, he thanked her quietly. He removed his gloves and held his hands near the flames. The warmth traveled through his fingers and into his chest. The cabin crackled gently, and for a moment, silence filled the space. An awkward silence neither of them knew how to break. He tried not to look at her too long, but he noticed details anyway. Her hair was damp from the melted snow. Her hands shook a little. She seemed strong, but also clearly frightened by the storm. How long have you been stuck? He asked. 3 hours, she said. I called for help, but the signal dropped. No one's coming until morning. He nodded again. Morning felt far away. They shared small conversations, only enough to not feel like strangers. She asked about his family. He told her gently about his daughter and how he never wanted her to worry. She listened more softly than he expected from someone with her reputation. Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin walls. The fire flickered. The room felt colder than before. She pulled her coat tighter and rubbed her arms, without meaning to. He whispered, "The storm's getting worse." She took a slow breath, looked at him, and for the first time that night, she seemed unsure of herself. They were two people from different worlds, stuck in one tiny cabin, and the night was only beginning. The wind outside grew louder, almost as if it was angry at the small cabin for standing in its way. The fire crackled softly, but even that warmth felt weaker now compared to the cold, pushing through the wooden walls. The single dad could feel the temperature dropping, and he quietly placed another log on the fire. He didn't ask her permission. He could tell she was freezing too. She watched him carefully, her eyes following every movement. She wasn't used to being around strangers, and certainly not in a situation where she had no control. CEOs were trained to lead rooms, control deals, and never appear weak. But tonight, weakness was creeping into her voice, her posture, even her breathing. "How did you even find this place?" she asked, trying to sound calm. He shrugged gently. "Just saw the light. Didn't know anyone was inside. I just needed a place to stay warm." She nodded slowly. "Same for me. My car died out there. I barely made it here." Another gust of wind hit the cabin, and she flinched. He noticed her hand tremble again. Normally he would keep his distance. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but tonight he had no choice but to acknowledge how cold she really was. "You okay?" he asked softly. She let out a small breath. I will be." But her voice didn't match her words. The fire dimmed again, and he instinctively shifted closer to it. She hesitated, watching him move, unsure whether she should do the same. After a long moment, she finally scooted her chair a little closer, trying not to look embarrassed. "Sorry," she murmured. "I'm just not used to this kind of weather." He gave a small smile. "No one really gets used to cold like this." They sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds were the storm and the fire. It didn't feel like an awkward silence anymore, just two tired people sharing a small space, waiting for the night to pass. After a while, she spoke again, her voice gentler this time. "You said you have a daughter?" He nodded. "Yeah, she's 7. Smart kid. I was supposed to reach home tonight. She hates when I'm late." For the first time, the CEO smiled a small, honest smile. "She must adore you." "She does," he said softly. "And I adore her. Everything I do is for her." Something in his tone softened the CEO's expression. She leaned her head slightly to the side, studying him with new curiosity, not the cold, distant attention of a powerful executive, but something warmer. "It must be hard," she said quietly. "Raising a child alone." "It has its days," he admitted. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." She looked down at her hands, thinking deeply. "I grew up with everything money could buy," she said, "but not much warmth at home. Hearing you talk about your daughter, I don't know, it feels rare." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He just let the moment sit between them. Another shiver ran through her, stronger this time. She tried to hide it by adjusting her coat, but it didn't help. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again, a little firmer now. She hesitated. Then she gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "Honestly, I'm freezing." He looked around the cabin. There was only one thick blanket on the small bed in the corner. The rest were too thin to help much. "You can take the blanket," he said. "I'll manage with the coat." She shook her head quickly. "No, you came in soaked. You need the warmth more than I do." "But you're shaking," he pointed out gently. "You won't make it through the night like that." Her eyes lifted slowly toward him, and for the first time, she looked completely honest. No business mask, no leadership posture, no controlled expression. Just a cold, scared human being in the middle of a storm. The fire dropped again, suddenly weaker, and both of them instinctively leaned closer to it. Their shoulders were only a foot apart now. She whispered, almost to herself, "This storm, it's getting dangerous." He nodded. "Yeah." A long silence followed, longer, heavier, and filled with something neither of them had felt before tonight. Not romance, not attraction. Something simpler. Vulnerability. The kind that happens only when two people who never expected to meet are forced to face the same fear in the same tiny room. The fire gave a small pop. She flinched again. rubbing her arms harder now. "Do you want to sit closer to the fire?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. They moved slowly, both careful not to overstep each other's space. But the cold forced them into a smaller circle of warmth. Their shoulders almost touched, and she let out a shaky breath, half relief, half exhaustion. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the silence grew softer. Finally, she whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "Thank you for not treating me like some title." He turned his head slightly toward her. "Tonight, you're just another person trying to survive. Same as me." Her eyes softened. Something changed in her expression at that moment, something he didn't fully understand yet. The night was far from over, and the cold was only getting worse. The fire was now a faint orange glow, the kind that struggled to survive each time the wind pushed against the cabin walls. The single dad could feel the cold crawling back into the room, slipping around their feet, climbing up their hands and necks. Even his breath was turning white again in the air. He leaned forward to adjust the burning log, but it barely helped. The CEO watched him, her shoulders tight, her hands clasped together as if she was trying to hold on to whatever warmth was left inside her body. "How much longer do you think the fire will last?" she asked quietly. "Maybe an hour," he answered. "If the wind doesn't get worse." She lifted her eyes slowly. "And after that?" He didn't want to tell her the truth, that the temperature was dropping so fast. The cabin might not stay warm enough without something more than a dim fire. So he just sighed. "I don't know," he said. Honestly, she looked down again, biting her lip. Her usual confidence was gone. What sat beside him was not a CEO, not someone powerful, not someone who commanded rooms. It was a person who hadn't slept in hours, who was freezing, who had nowhere else to go. Her voice softened as she spoke again. "I've never been this cold before." "I know," he said gently. "Just try to stay close to the fire." She nodded, but her body shook again. A small, almost invisible tremble ran through her arms, and she pulled her coat tighter, but it didn't help. The cold had already found its way past the fabric. He noticed the way she hugged herself, the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her breath hitched. She was trying to hide her fear, but fear has a way of showing itself in silence. "Do you want the blanket?" he asked again, meaning it, even though he was shivering himself. She shook her head quickly. "You need it too." "The fire's going out," he reminded her softly. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and something in them changed, not panic, not embarrassment, but a quiet honesty. She didn't want to say it, but she also didn't want to freeze through the night. Another gust of wind hit the cabin. The flame flickered so hard it nearly died. She inhaled sharply through her nose, and her voice came out small. "Can I ask you something?" He turned to her. "Of course." She hesitated too long. She tried to speak once, stopped, then tried again. Her fingers pressed into the fabric of her coat as if she needed courage to keep going. "I don't want you to misunderstand," she whispered, her voice barely above the sound of the storm. "This isn't anything strange or inappropriate. It's just—" She paused again, her breath shaky. "The cold is getting dangerous." He nodded slowly, waiting. Her eyes lowered, and her shoulders dropped as if she was finally surrendering to the moment. "Could I—" Her voice broke slightly. She tried again, softer. "Could I slip under your blanket? Just so we don't freeze?" She immediately looked away, cheeks warming not from heat but from discomfort. She wasn't the person who asked for help, not from anyone, and especially not from someone she barely knew. She added quickly, almost stumbling over the words, "Only if it's okay. Only for warmth. Nothing more. I can't stop shaking." He didn't answer right away. Not because he was unsure, but because he understood the weight of what she was asking. Not romantically, not boldly, just humanly. The kind of request a person makes when pride becomes less important than survival. He finally said softly, "It's okay. I understand." Her eyes closed in relief. "Thank you." He moved slightly to create space, lifting the edge of the thick blanket. She hesitated again before moving closer, careful and respectful, keeping space between them even under the shared warmth. Their shoulders didn't touch at first. She kept her arms close to her chest, trying to make herself small. The blanket held the heat quickly. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than sitting apart. For the first time in hours, her shivering slowed. She exhaled a breath she'd been holding for too long. "I'm sorry if this feels strange." "It doesn't," he said simply. "It's just a cold night. We're both trying to get through it." She nodded, eyes softening. "Still, thank you. I don't usually ask for help." "I figured," he said gently. She gave a faint smile. "You figured right." They sat quietly, the blanket wrapped around them both, keeping the cold at a distance. The fire gave one last flicker before settling into a low glow that barely reached the walls. Inside the blanket, it felt different, not warm, but safe. Safe enough for two people who lived opposite lives to share a moment neither expected. The storm continued outside. But inside the cabin, something subtle had changed, something neither of them had words for yet. Not romance. Not attraction. Just understanding. Two humans surviving the same night, and morning was still far away. The night felt endless, but slowly, very slowly, the storm outside softened. The wind still pushed against the cabin walls, but it no longer screamed. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, giving off just enough light to paint soft shadows on the wooden floor. The single dad opened his eyes first. He didn't remember when he fell asleep, but he remembered the cold easing only after she slipped under the blanket beside him. They hadn't touched, not even once, but the shared warmth had kept them alive through the night. He lay still for a moment, listening. Her breathing was soft and steady, lighter than it had been the night before. She wasn't shivering anymore. He turned his head slightly and saw her resting peacefully. Her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen since the moment he walked into the cabin. In sleep, she looked nothing like the CEO people described. No tension in her jaw, no seriousness in her expression. Just human. He sat up slowly so he wouldn't wake her. The movement caused the blanket to shift slightly, and she stirred with a small, tired sigh before opening her eyes. It took her a moment to remember where she was when she did. Her cheeks warmed with a mix of embarrassment and relief. "Good morning," she whispered. "Morning," he replied gently. She rubbed her hands together. The room was still cold, but nothing like last night. The storm clouds outside were finally breaking, and faint morning light crept in through the window. She sat up too, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little," he said. "You?" "More than I expected." She smiled weakly. "Thanks to the blanket." He nodded. No words were needed. For a moment, they both just sat quietly, letting reality settle back in. The night had been tense, strange, and unexpected. But it was over. Now they were two people waking up to the consequences of a night they never planned to share. She cleared her throat, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "I hope I didn't make things uncomfortable last night, asking you that question." "You didn't," he said honestly. "You did what anyone would do in that cold." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "I'm glad you understood." He gave a small smile. "I did." She watched him for a moment, as if studying the truth behind his words. She seemed surprised by how calm he was, how gentle, how patient. People outside the cabin probably expected her to be the strong one, the one in control. But last night had shown her something different. He was the steady one. He was the strong one, and he didn't even try to be. He just was. "Can I ask you something?" She said softly. "Sure. How do you stay so composed?" "Even last night." You stayed calm when most people would panic. He shrugged lightly. I've had to learn. When you're raising a child alone, you don't get the option to fall apart. You stay steady because someone else depends on you. Her expression softened in a way that felt deeper than sympathy, almost like admiration. That must be incredibly hard, she whispered. Doing everything on your own. He looked down at his hands. Some days are harder than others, but she's worth it. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something closer to quiet respect. No wonder your daughter loves you so much, she said. You're the kind of father people rarely talk about. But should. He didn't know how to respond to that. So he simply nodded. She looked around the cabin then, noticing the marks of the long night, the melted snow near the doorway, the dying fire. The blanket folded between them. It's strange, she said softly. Last night I kept thinking, I shouldn't be here. That someone like me shouldn't end up stranded in a cabin with a stranger. And now? He asked. And now, she said slowly, I'm thinking maybe it happened for a reason. He blinked, unsure what she meant. She continued, her voice steady but gentle. I spend my life in meetings, in boardrooms, making decisions that affect thousands of people. Everyone sees me as this unstoppable person who never breaks. But last night, I felt like a different version of myself. A version I haven't seen in years. He listened quietly. You didn't treat me like a CEO, she said. You treated me like a human being. Someone scared, someone cold, someone who needed help. And you didn't judge me for it. You were just a person needing warmth, he replied. That's all. She smiled softly. Most people don't see me that simply. They shared a moment small, unspoken, but sincere, the kind of moment only two people who survived the same night could understand. A sudden crunching noise came from outside, the sound of boots stepping on fresh snow. They both turned toward the window. Rescue? He guessed. She stood slowly, pulling her coat tighter. Looks like it. But neither of them moved toward the door. Not immediately. They were both thinking the same thing. Something changed last night. Not romance. Not promises. Just a shift, a quiet understanding that life sometimes brings. Strangers together for reasons they won't understand until much later. She finally whispered. Whatever happens after this, thank you for everything. He nodded. You're welcome. They stepped toward the door together. The storm was over, but life after the cabin was just beginning. The rescue team called out from outside the cabin, their voices firm but cheerful. Snow crunched under their boots as they moved closer, checking if anyone inside needed help. The storm had calmed, but the cold was still sharp, biting through the morning air. The single dad opened the door first. A wave of freezing wind rushed in, but this time it didn't feel threatening. Help had arrived. The long night in the cabin was finally behind them. A rescuer shined a light briefly into the room, before lowering it and smiling. You two all right? Yes, the single dad replied. Thanks to the cabin. And the fire. And to each other, the CEO added quietly, surprising even herself. They stepped outside. Snow covered everything, the trees, the road, the abandoned cars, and the path that they somehow survived traveling on last night. Their breaths formed small clouds in the air. The rescue team checked their health, offered warm drinks, and began plans to get them back to town. But through all the movements and voices, something hung quietly between the two of them, a strange, soft awareness that what happened last night wasn't just an accident of weather. It was a turning point. As they prepared to be transported, the single dad and the CEO stood side by side, both wrapped in blankets given by the rescuers. One rescuer asked, "Do you two know each other?" The CEO opened her mouth to answer, but paused. "No," she said finally. "Not before last night. But there was something in her tone that made the rescuer tilt his head, curious. He didn't press further. They walked toward the rescue vehicle in silence. The CEO hesitated before stepping inside and glanced back at the cabin. The small wooden structure stood quietly, almost as if it had been watching over them. She looked down for a moment, remembering the fear, the cold, the fire, and the man who kept her calm when she thought she might break. Inside the vehicle, she sat across from him. The space was small, but not as small as the cabin had felt. Yet for the first time, she realized she didn't know what to say. They weren't trapped anymore. There was no storm keeping them close. They were simply two people riding back to their own lives. What happens now? She asked softly. He looked at her, unsure if she meant the rescue or something deeper. We go home, I guess. She nodded, but her expression showed that wasn't the answer she had been thinking about. The ride was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. They both stared out the windows, watching the snowy world pass by. A world untouched by the strange night they shared. When they finally reached town, people rushed around them, police officers, rescue workers, volunteers. The CEO's assistant sprinted up to her, nearly in tears. We've been looking everywhere for you. The CEO hugged her back gently. I'm fine, really. A few feet away, the single dad saw his little daughter running toward him, her tiny boots kicking snow everywhere. Daddy! She shouted. He knelt, opening his arms just in time for her to leap into them. He held her tightly, the warmth of her small body melting away the last pieces of fear inside him. I'm here, he whispered into her hair. I'm right here. The CEO watched them quietly. She wasn't the kind of person who got emotional in public. She wasn't the kind of person who cried easily. She wasn't the kind of person who let anyone see her vulnerable. But for a moment, she felt something rise in her chest, something she didn't know how to describe. Admiration, respect, maybe even envy. Not for his struggles, but for the love in his life. He stood, holding his daughter's hand. Their eyes met across the snow-covered road. Thank you, she said, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. For what? He asked. For being steady when I couldn't be, she replied. For seeing me as a person, not a title. He smiled gently. Anyone would have helped. She shook her head. No, not like you did. A silence stretched between them, not awkward, just meaningful. She looked around at the crowd gathering her luggage, her phone, her files. Her world was already pulling her back. Meetings, decisions, pressure, expectations. Everything she had left behind for one strange night. But she wasn't ready to let the moment end without something more. She stepped closer. I know your life is full. I can see how much you love your daughter. I respect that more than you know. He nodded politely, unsure where she was going with this. She took a slow breath. But if you ever need anything, guidance, help, a connection, a chance, you can reach out. Not because I'm a CEO, but because I believe you deserve opportunities. He didn't answer right away. He looked at his daughter, then back at her. I appreciate that, he said sincerely. But I don't want anything from you except honesty. She smiled, truly smiled. Then let me be honest. She pulled a small card from her coat pocket and held it out. This is my direct line. Not my office. Not my assistant. Mine. He hesitated, then took it. She stepped back as her team waved for her to follow. Before leaving, she said one last thing, soft, steady, and unforgettable. The storm was terrifying. But meeting you wasn't. He nodded. Same. She walked away, surrounded by people, responsibilities, and a world that expected her to be strong at all times. But for one night, in one small cabin, she had been allowed to be human. And that, more than anything, changed everything.